What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA look ahead. We are joined today for the Cleveland Cavaliers by Justin Rowan of the Chase Down podcast, one of the best podcasts out there. The link to which will be in our podcast and YouTube description. So go subscribe to them if you have not done so already. Get into all things Cavs. Great discussion. Very quickly, if you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the whole nine. Subscribe across all platforms. Like, comment on our YouTube videos, help the algo love us back. And can't stress this enough, though. If you've done all those things, tell people about us. And if you're new around here, stick around for more than just the Cavs coverage. We do cover the entire league. Grant and I are exceptionally awesome at it, and we have a lot of fun around these parts. So consider becoming a permanent subscriber, even beyond these look ahead series that we're putting out. But let's get to actual Cleveland Cavaliers talk with the one, the only, Mr. Justin Rowe. Justin, welcome back. I think this might be year 5 or 6 for you coming on to do the Cavaliers look ahead with me. So I appreciate you coming back so many times. How the heck are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm trying to get up to double digits. I'm trying to, continue to hang more of these HardwoodKnocks banners around my office, but it's great to be back. I'm not the only one that's back. Like it's fitting that you bring me back to do preview because the Cleveland Cavaliers basically in their entirety are back this season, which is a very unusual thing, but something that I do get a little bit of enjoyment from for sure.
Yeah, and look, let's start there. So they switched head coaches, which I'll ask you about. They go from JB Bickerstaff to Kenny Atkinson. But given how the season unfolded, and I know there were a lot of injuries, but just the rhetoric around the team, and then also just knowing about what was published in The Athletic immediately afterwards, are you surprised that they're back in like what is basically and we don't know what's going on with Isaac Okoro right now, obviously, but they're basically just ran it back where it seemed like in that moment, maybe that was a prisoner of the moment type thing, but it was almost not that I advocated for it. I personally was surprised that they're running it back to this degree.
Yeah, it definitely is a little surprising. I mean, when I saw that Athletic article come out and just, when the playoffs came to a conclusion, I was like, well, like we're probably going to see this core get split up to some extent, right? Like we're probably going to see a little bit of a shakeup because that's just the way that the NBA operates. And, I think the Athletic article got cited a whole lot and nothing really came of it. It was funny to see that aggregated to the extent that it was, but then like the follow-up stuff of like Darius Garland like reportedly being really mad that people were saying that because he didn't want to leave. And then you even hear like Brian Windhorst kind of alluded that to later on his podcast where he's like, Garland never wanted out. This was maybe like an agent gone rogue type thing. I don't think it's even that. Like I think it's just one of those conversations. Like if I had to guess, when I looked at that playoff series, Garland was basically put into an off-ball role, a shooting guard type role, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was conversations about, okay, well, what's the role going to be moving forward? If we're not using our point guard as a point guard, would it be better to have a mutual parting ways? Or like, I'm obviously just speculating here, but I think the way that it was portrayed in that article just did not match up with reality. Because if it was a situation where Donovan wanted Jarrett gone or he wanted Darius gone as a condition of extending, that probably would have happened because he did end up extending, right? So I think Donovan's extension was kind of the ultimate vote of confidence for what they currently have and a belief that, hey, there were external factors that led to where we got last season. We still kind of accomplished the goal that we stated on media day, but we feel like there's still some meat left on the bone here with this group, and we want to explore that space.
Were any of the extensions surprising to you? The Evan Mobley one just wasn't. And then I think Donovan Mitchell, people were still wondering, was he going to sign it? What was it going to look like when he signed it? So maybe the terms were a little bit surprising. I personally, maybe I was reading too much into the Athletic piece, was just shocked when I saw the Jared Allen extension.
Yeah, the Donovan one didn't surprise me. It kind of seemed pretty clear that the Knicks had moved on from pursuing him in a lot of ways. And like realistically speaking, when it comes to Donovan, my belief has been that he cares about winning more than market. Like I think that is a guy whose number one priority is where can I kind of go the furthest, and going to Miami, who finished worse than the Cavs, that have limited assets that they'd have to kind of deplete to get there. That would be a lifestyle choice. That's not a basketball choice. I would argue probably even the Knicks, if they had to give up a whole bunch of assets to get Donovan, you're still stuck with kind of that undersized backcourt with Donovan and Jalen Brunson, and you don't have that same defensive infrastructure to make up for it. Brunson, the last few years has rated out as a much worse defender than Darius Garland. You're going to need to find defense, and you'd probably be sending that defense out to get Donovan. So I wasn't surprised by that. The Jared one definitely did. Not necessarily from, a trade standpoint, but he left money on the table, like serious money on the table. When you look at his current contract that he's on and the ability to only extend a certain percentage above that amount, I was very surprised because this is such a value contract to have him, getting like Andrew Nembhard or less than Andrew Nembhard money for near all-star level production. So for him to kind of add those 3 years onto the deal that are basically what Hartenstein is getting right now in a future cap, like that is once again going to be a value contract. So I think I'm less married to the too big concept than I have been in the past. But I think whether you are on team run it back or team let's find a deal, the extension is a very good thing because I think it raises his value to a contending team, which makes him more attractive as a trade asset. And the Cavs, and probably in their eyes, view themselves as a contending team. So having that contract on the books is pretty valuable for them as well.
Yeah, I wonder if it had I looked at it in two ways where I wonder if it was a reaction to like what happened on the market this year when you saw so many non-megastars get repressed. And then the best way it seems like to get paid right now is for your team to value you and they'll just re-sign you for a ton of money. And knowing that Evan Mobley's in Cleveland, if you fast forward 2 years and they're paying him at that point, it's, well, were the Cavs going to be prepared to give him that big money deal if he was still there? So, but either way, I do agree with your point that whether they plan on keeping him or if this is a contract that gets moved, he's more valuable to them now than he was before he signed the extension, which is, again, why it struck me that it was actually signed. This leads into the decision to move on from JB Bickerstaff, though. But so they decide to run it back. As you said, they think there's more meat left on the bone, but they think they saw enough last season, despite all the mitigating circumstances, to decide it was time to move on from JB Bickerstaff. How do you strike that balance to be like, well, this group clearly has more to extract from it, but we're going to read enough into this season to move on from the head coach anyway?
I think there was enough noise kind of looking back on the reporting that he had kind of lost the locker room. And I think when that occurs, no matter how good you are tactically, you basically have to make a decision. Are we sticking with the coach or are we sticking with the roster as currently constructed? And I think, for the Cavs, that's an obvious choice to stick with the roster in that scenario. It was the first year that I felt the Cavs weren't more than the sum of their parts. And, injuries definitely played a factor, but, just from a possession to possession buy-in level, I didn't feel that it was there this season. I felt like they weren't kind of stacking successes. Like they weren't taking what worked well and then, adding sets to it. And or like, here's our primary look on a play. What's our second and third option that we're going to go to? It almost felt like things were getting simplified as the year went on, and there was just less buy-in. There was more isolation play, which historically they've kind of been a low isolation team for these last couple of years. I just felt that the level of buy-in just wasn't there anymore. And when that happens, and you hear reports about not necessarily talking to the players as frequently as he used to, or whatever the case may be, I think those are the type of situations where a mutual parting of ways is beneficial. Because honestly, like I think JB is going to do a really good job in Detroit. I think that's a really smart hire for them. But sometimes in the NBA, those voices kind of reach their expiry date. And in the case of JB and the Cavs, I think it was fair to say that that point had kind of been reached.
What do you make of the decision to hire Kenny Atkinson? And do you have any just thoughts or insight into how we can expect the Cavs to change under his stewardship?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting hire. When we were looking at the candidates, one of the things that I felt strongly about was I did not want a first-time head coach. I wanted someone that had some head coaching experience. I just think when you're managing, star personalities and whatnot, and you're handling the pressure of this kind of a situation, I don't want that to be an Adrian Griffin situation, right? Where, no matter how good you are from a tactical standpoint, no matter how well you know the game, making that translate and doing the personality portion of this from a head coaching perspective isn't something that just comes naturally that can be assumed. I do think it's interesting when you look at Kenny, what he's accomplished as a head coach in the NBA is very similar to JB, right? Like you took a team that was not very good, got it out of the lottery and got it to the playoffs. In fact, like he's accomplished less as a head coach. But I really did like in the introductory press conference with Kenny Atkinson how he spoke to, learning from the Golden State experience. I think the benefit of being, an associate head coach on a championship team, I think you benefit from that experience more if you already have some head coaching experience, because then all right, what were my strengths and weaknesses when I was in that position? And then you're looking at Steve Kerr in a championship run and seeing how he manages those same type of
Mhm.
situations. And he talked about that extensively in his interviews and press conferences and whatnot, of learning to be a less rigid as a coach, getting the input from the players, really making it a collaborative process, being a sponge, right? And I just really liked everything that he had to say from that. And you know, I I think sometimes when it comes to basketball, we talk about coaches as kind of like finished products that we're trying to figure out, are they good or are they bad? When in reality, they're just like players where they have good and bad years. They can learn from their experiences, or they can learn the wrong lessons and regress as a coach. I think it's a good swing to take. And, I do think the fact that he is regarded as one of the stronger player development coaches that we have in the league, I think that's beneficial for a team that still is relying on a lot of internal growth to take those steps forward.
I think it also helps too because people point out the concern about look how things unfolded in Brooklyn once he had the stars there. The situation was so unique because he was already there. And so you
Yeah.
spent years laying this certain culture and it just gets upended. Like the whole thing was meteoric and how quickly it happened. So there's a difference in how it's happening here. And also he's coming into this situation rather than just he's already there and the ground is shifting beneath his feet. And so that on top of what you just mentioned about having that experience now with the Warriors of, because before he gets to Brooklyn, like he just wasn't with the same type of star players that he was like in Atlanta and stuff like that he had in Golden State. So I think those two factors made me, I would have liked the hire regardless because I like the way he coaches. I like the way his teams play. He seems to get, this is different because the Cavs are so good, but he does seem to like get more runway out of his teams, like when he's not dealing with as many star
Yeah.
players. So I would have liked it regardless, but I like it even more knowing those two factors like sort of colliding.
And it also was encouraging to hear stories of, Draymond and Steph reaching out to Donovan and Darius. Obviously both of those guys have relationships with Steph and Draymond as well. And them being like, Kenny really learned from this experience. Like Kenny played a big role in us winning a championship. Like Kenny's the guy that's going to help get you over the mountaintop. And I definitely shared some of those concerns with Brooklyn of, okay, like you got it done with role players, but you didn't get it done with stars. But you also got to remember who those stars were and how difficult those stars were. One of them, in fact, I think his quote was, "We don't need a coach." Those were also stars that weren't happy with the coach that they handpicked to coach the team. Those are stars that on multiple occasions have not been happy with the franchises that they handpicked going to. That reach those expiry dates very, very, very quickly. So I think this is a little bit of a different situation, and I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to the Cavs, and a lot of the focus is on two guards, two bigs, and all like historically have teams won like that. The thing to remember is like historically, a lot of teams, there's not a lot of teams that have won without a top 10, like a consensus top 10 player. And
Mhm.
the Cavs, like as good as Donovan is, he's not a consensus top 10 player. The teams that have won with those type of players usually get production from a whole lot of different guys. You surround them with all-star level talent. I think the Cavs have 4 all-star caliber players on their roster. So getting all 4 of those guys to work and managing those personalities, I think that's a different skill set than, we have a hierarchy of 2 super duper stars and everyone else is just falling in line.
It's funny you say that about Donovan Mitchell. I think this is probably the season he came closest to being a consensus top 10 player because I had
Yeah.
him on my first team All NBA before the injury both nuked his performance and like then he just wasn't eligible to
Yeah,
for it.
and that's part of why I say consensus, because in my mind, like I always think tiers matter so much more than rankings, right? Like there might be 5 top 10 players in the league in any given year, and I definitely think Donovan is in that caliber of guy that can outplay any player in the league in a playoff series. I felt that way about Kyrie Irving back in the day, where people wouldn't have him necessarily as a top 10 player, but we could also see him outplay Steph in multiple finals, right? Like you're of that caliber, but it's still a different thing than when you're that consensus LeBron James type guy, and that takes some some adjusting. But I honestly think like he's closer to like a Tatum than Tatum is to a LeBron caliber guy, right? Like Boston won a championship without Tatum really playing that well.
Mhm.
That's not the case for like a Joel Embiid or a Nikola Jokic or a LeBron James and all that. I think from a Cavs standpoint, if they're going to want to contend, it's going to need to look similar to Boston, where if one of the stars doesn't have it, we have other guys that are able to contribute at a star level for a playoff series and help raise the tide and give the team a chance to compete.
I think that's also kind of what I saw from Donovan Mitchell during that injury stretch where you don't have Mobley, you don't have Darius Garland. The stuff he was doing as balancing in terms of being the floor general for everybody else, but also having to carry the offense as a scorer. Even dating back to his time in Utah, I just never seen a balancing act like that from him. And it continued along this trend of, for the most part, the Donovan Mitchell experience in Cleveland for me, and I'm curious how you feel about this, it's exceeded even what my expectations were. And I had pretty low, I was higher on the Cavs last year and we did this than you were. Turns out I was wrong. Injuries really new to that. But like, so it's exceeded my expectations, just the Donovan Mitchell experience in Cleveland.
Yeah, it definitely exceeded mine. I was not incredibly high on Donovan Mitchell prior to him coming to the Cavs. I was a little skeptical when the trade went down. Looking at his tenure in Utah, he had one season of career average efficiency, right? The majority of those years, the Jazz were better with him off the court than they were on the court. I do think that he has grown as a player. I've been incredibly impressed with the way that he carries himself, both on and off the court. And I'm really encouraged by his ability to continue to grow. I think that stretch with Garland and Mobley out was the best playmaking that I'd seen from him.
Yeah.
Really, really, really impressive. Obviously there's a disclaimer that they went 11-3 in those games with Donovan and Jarrett. They only played two teams with an above 500 record. One was the Milwaukee, who was below 500 after the firing of Adrian Griffin and with an interim coach at the time, and the other one was Orlando, who we know that they're better than. They beat them in a playoff series. So maybe that had something to do with it, but I do think his playmaking took another step forward last year. And I just think that the infrastructure that the Cavs have had, like he's talked in the past about how, he benefits from playing off of a point guard, whether it was Ricky Rubio, Mike Conley, and then, Darius, he had his best individual season. They both had their best individual seasons in 22-23. So I think, that muscle memory of handling that playmaking load is going to help as they stagger. I think it's also going to help as we transition to a Kenny Atkinson offense, where you're going to have a lot of guys initiating. You're going to have a lot of guys responsible for creating, and having Donovan improve as a playmaker, I think is going to fit neatly into what Kenny wants to do.
So before we get into more of the granular aspects of this team, its upcoming season, what is the biggest single development storyline, whatever, that you're just looking at or going to be monitoring, not just heading into next season, but over the course of it?
You bring on someone that covers the Cavs all the time, so they don't give the same answers that the national folks are going to do. But I think I've got to go default here and say the growth of Evan Mobley. I flat out think when you are building an offense around two smaller guards, you need to have a front court initiator for it to work, right? Like we saw that with Toronto when they won the championship with Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry playing major minutes together. You had that with Marc Gasol, right? And Kawhi Leonard was able to do some of that. You need to have a front court initiator to alleviate the pressure and allow those guards to not have to face, the traps and the crap that defenses can throw at them. So Evan Mobley developing as a secondary initiator for the offense and being that release valve, and allowing Donovan and Darius to get easier looks off ball at times, I think that is what helps make their offense more multifaceted and gives them a chance to compete against the Bostons, New York, Philly, Milwaukee's of the world. Because the thing about them in the playoffs is their defense is held up. Their defense, their offense and defense was better against Boston than Dallas's was. Their defense with both guards and only one big has been elite in the regular season and the playoffs, right? Like so often people say you need to have Jared Allen and Evan Mobley to make Donovan and Darius work defensively. No, it worked really, really damn well with both guards and just one of the bigs, even in the playoffs. They outscored Boston with Darius and Donovan and Mobley on the court for the playoff series, right? Like the thing that hasn't translated, whether it's one big, whether it's two bigs, whether it's two guards, whether it's one guard, the offense has not translated to the playoffs. And I think getting Mobley to the point where he can help be that front court initiator to the offense gives them the best chance to make what's worked well in the regular season at times to something that can, be viable in the playoffs and give them a chance to compete.
Now, what needs to be done on Mobley's part? And I do think this eventually ties in the question of where you're at with the dual big setup for him to reach that level. I think the obvious low hanging fruit, we saw a little bit of it when he came back from injury, is taking 3-pointers. He was almost at 2 a game from there, hit them in a nice clip. Didn't necessarily hold up in the playoffs, but like to do what you're asking him to do, it seems like one, there needs to be more space, and he's going to be part of generating that space. But two, there's going to need to be other things like, can he tighten up his handle, and not just in space, but in traffic. But if you're looking at that role, or for him to actualize that ceiling, what's the one thing that you'll be monitoring then most closely about his development, like to make that happen, to him to fulfill that role?
Yeah, I mean, if I can pick one thing, it would be the handle. Like I want the handle to improve because I think that would help, him be a more consistent initiator of the offense. I think that would help him be a threat and be able to put rim pressure on. My favorite stat is Evan Mobley last year, despite missing, a good chunk of the season with that surgery, he made more threes last season than Bam Adebayo's made in his career, and Zion Williamson has made in their careers. Like they don't get talked about in that way, right? Like Bam, he hit some threes with a shorter line in FIBA competition, and it's, oh my God, is this the year of stretch 5 Bam, right? And we're putting Kel Ware here to play the 5, and Bam's moving over to the 4, right? Like he's what, 5 years older than Evan Mobley, and Mobley's made more threes last season than Bam has in his career. Like I would like to see the volume go up, right? He shot 37% last year. I'd like to see that tick up to 3 attempts per game. I think that's where I would feel comfortable, but I don't want to see him taking more than that. What I want to see is him, being able to put that rim pressure on, being able to handle the ball, bringing it up in transition and helping them up their pace. Like that's the kind of stuff that can help unstick the offense. And you don't hear Pelicans folks talk about, well, like we need a stretch 5 to work around Zion, right? Or because we have Herb Jones out there who shoots like Isaac Okoro and gets ignored at the exact same rate. And we have Jonas who takes 1-3 a game, although he's gone to Washington. Like you don't hear that, but you don't hear that because Zion is able to negate that spacing issue by his ability to create. So I think I want to see that from Evan Mobley more than anything else. And like if I could, gift him with the one skill or one thing from, the summer workout videos to have translated, it's definitely that.
I also wonder too, with those two specifically, I actually do think Pelicans well, I guess they want any sort of 5 on the team right now, but I do think that there was kind
fair,
of,
yeah.
there was kind
Why
of
is
an
Wendell
obsession.
Carter Jr. not on there? Sorry to get
Yeah.
sidetracked.
But with Zion and Bam, they can score as a play finisher in such like a physical way that, and even Zion on the ball, like he's not your traditional big. And I wonder if Evan Mobley, I think he's gotten better at that, but like that was also a concern about how he's going to deal with contact and physicality. So even if he, as a play finisher, felt like more of a physical presence, I wonder if the discourse around him would be different. I also think he probably just set like the bar too high for himself. Where he was my defensive player of the year pick, not this past season, obviously, but the one before.
Yeah.
And then just he sets the bar so high through his first like year, and then the Cavs are quote unquote on this accelerated timeline because of the Donovan Mitchell trade. I do wonder how that's also impacted how people view him too.
Yeah, and to give him some credit too, I think they're on an accelerated timeline because of Evan Mobley, right? Like they were a lottery team, and drafting Evan Mobley immediately made them a elite defense, right? And once you have that end of the floor figured out, you can make a move for Donovan Mitchell, right? Like, so I think, his growth has kind of helped accelerate that timeline as well. So, but he's definitely a victim of that to some extent. But you look at it from a per 36 possession kind of standpoint, He's averaging career highs in everything, right? Like his minutes came down just when he was on minute restriction, but like points, field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, defensive metrics, all that kind of stuff, efficiency, it was all career highs. I just think, he's just got to round out his game and do things that he's already shown at a higher frequency, right? Like he shot better from mid-range last year. I think that's one of the big differentiations between he and Bam is that kind of credible threat to shoot from the free throw line at all times. You can run an offense and have him as that hub at the nail, and you have to respect his jumper from that spot. If Mobley can do that, I think that opens up a wide variety of options, and it makes easier to have Allen in the dunker spot and run some actions with the guards and whatnot. So I think what he needs to do isn't something that he's never shown, right? Like he's shown it in spurts. He'll hit those shots. I forget which team he hit the game-winning mid-range shot against. He's hit some big threes coming down in the clutch in the fourth quarter and stuff like that. He's just got to do it consistently and at a higher volume.
I guess the two concerns I would have though is so Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland can play fantastic. Like they work off the ball. Like defenses need to respect them. But we also kind of you've talked about it a couple times about the concern about moving Darius Garland off the ball too much to where it sort of disinvolves him.
Yeah.
And so is the opportunity going to be there for Evan Mobley to explore like the depths of like getting to that point with like him as an individual ceiling, of course, but then also if you're trying to maximize his time alongside Jared Allen, like, is there going to be sort of enough reps to go around there it's not a matter of Donovan. I want to make clear to anyone listening. It's not a matter of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland can't. It's how much do you want to invest in moving them away from the ball to kind of help facilitate the optimal version of Evan Mobley?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, you also have to factor in the growth that Jared Allen showed last year, right? Like I thought, it was the best season of his career, and he was passing like really well the short roll, and he was someone that you could initiate offense through at times. Like it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem to have at times. And I think what he's going to need to do within that starting lineup is going to be different than over the course of the game. Like I think if he's taking 3 threes a game, I want those threes to occur when Jared Allen is on the court, right? Like when Jared Allen is not on the court, I want to see, let's run some more offense through him, right? Like I think, historically, the funny thing to look at is when you look at the 2 years worth of lineup data, Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell as a pairing without Garland and Allen does not work. Their net rating is, about where the Brooklyn Nets were last season. But him and Darius work incredibly well. Donovan and Jared work incredibly well. Darius and Jared did not work really well. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic. But ultimately, like those guys will play 18 minutes together per game. That's typically where you're at. You do still have kind of 30 minutes to explore the space where it's going to be one guard and it's going to be one big out there. It will be interesting to see, though, what happens in closing minutes, right? And maybe this is one of the benefits of having Jared on a value contract, right? Like that deal apparently is supposed to be like 15-16% of the cap once those cap numbers come in, like 15-16%. Like we're talking about Max Strus money, like in terms of percentage of the cap. If you need to play him 28 minutes in a game rather than 34. That is something that you can do, and like you're not kind of handcuffed to make those decisions. But I think if we want to look at the best version of what this Cavs roster can be, it's maximizing those minutes when all 4 of them are out there together. 22-23, they did that. They were tremendous. You look at the last 41 games of that season, and Darius was getting 22 and 8. Mobley was getting his 18 and 10. Jared was getting his 15 and 10. Donovan was getting his like 28 and 4 or whatever he was getting, right? Like all 4 of them were eating and they were playing well alongside one another. But I think making it so that there's the buy-in to the system, that the minutes together are maximized, the minutes apart are maximized, where it's not as stark of, okay, well, what are these pairings? Like figuring out how to make Donovan and Mobley work, figuring out how to get Darius and JA back on the same page, like they were in the All-Star season. Like I think all of that stuff is going to be kind of one of those interesting things to track with this coaching staff.
My final concern with it would be that there's a chance Evan Mobley does all these things and the Cavs play it perfectly. And to some extent, may not matter because, and I'm not comparing him to this player, but we saw it in OKC when Josh Giddey was actually taking and hitting threes and defenses still didn't care because it was never enough at a clip. So it still made OKC Thunder when he was on the floor with some of these other guys a lot easier to defend. And so I'm going to be very interested to track that dynamic. But my own answer to my own concern has been, you mentioned that first season, they were in the 96th percentile of offensive efficiency with all four of those guys on the court. And I think three of their three top used lineups all included a fifth member of the rotation that was a below average shooter, you would call them. It was Isaac Okoro at the time, Caris LeVert. I think that might have been the Lamar Stevens year. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And so that's
Lamar was the only one that it didn't work, I believe.
And so like, that's what I continue to latch onto is like, okay, well, even if it's like if Evan Mobley, if that version of Evan Mobley's hitting threes and defenses, they're going to have to respect him a little bit more so they can play off and say, you know what, we're fine with his 3 attempts per game. And he can make 2 of them and we're just not going to care every time. But I point back to that season where we just had this extended sample. I would call it at full strength. It was worse circumstances when you look at the supporting cast. So I almost don't understand how this isn't going to work now if everybody's healthy. So it's like, I have concerns, but I'm like, well, just let's go look at the first season when they had less experience and less talent like together. So that's where I'm at.
And that goes back to what I was saying before about if you're going to build a contending team without a consensus top 10 player, where it's just inarguable that you have this superstar LeBron James level talent, you don't bridge that gap by trading all-star level talent for role players that just, fit an archetype, like a big wing, like let's move Jared Allen for Cam Johnson. Okay, well, like now you have a big wing, but like you're getting worse from a talent perspective, right? Like, or, as much as I love Brian Windhorst, like the fact that he is so adamant that Donovan Mitchell can be the only ball handler on the team. And we got to run a heliocentric offense with spot up guys and one big around Donovan Mitchell. Like, that never works. Like, Dallas learned that lesson and got Kyrie for Luka, right? Like, like that, like Donovan Mitchell playing Russell Westbrook martyr ball is not going to bridge the gap, right? Like, this is not what needs to be done here. We're like, we have to get all-star level talent. We need to maximize all of this talent. I don't think Donovan's as good of a playmaker as Russ was, and it didn't work with Russ, right? Like, I share some of your concerns for sure. I think if Mobley is, taking 3 threes a game at the same percentage he did last year, 37%, I agree with you. I don't think people are like sprinting out to the 3-point line to go guard him. But I think him being a viable threat there is at least important, because if he's out there and he gets the ball and you're completely sagging off of him, all right, I'm just going to do a little dribble handoff to Garland or Mitchell. I'm going to take this shot myself and I'll convert some of these. But I think the handle, that's where it becomes so important, because if you're giving a 7-footer that's added strength, that finishes well historically around the rim, that has a good floater, good touch from that mid range, if you're giving him a head start and you're flat-footed as a defender sitting in the paint, you are going to get exposed. You are not, that's why people come out at Giannis. They don't want to give him that running start, even though he can't shoot from 3, right? Like, so that's why I think that is so important. And, I think guys that shoot well, but at a low volume, I think that's more of a concern at the perimeter than it is for a power forward or a center, right? Like, I think that's just a different equation. And that's where we run into someone like Isaac Okoro, who shot 39% from 3, but because the volume isn't there, guys are going to leave him wide open. I think he took 2 threes with a defender within 6 feet last year. And, to go back to the Pelicans example, exact same thing happened to Herb Jones. I think he shot 40%, but did not have a single contested 3 in the playoffs, because people are like, well, if you're going to shoot 40%, but you're taking 3 threes, like worst case scenario, you hit 1 or 2 here. Like, we can live with that in order to pack the paint and take away, more consistent threats like a Zion Williamson.
I think it's interesting. I would say definitely when he's at the 5, like, I don't think it matters. I still think we're at the point where if it's from the 4 spot, I still think you could see some of the like similar ill effects there of that.
Oh, for sure. I just think, you can mitigate some of that by improving the handle. It would be my argument.
So Darius Garland had the numbers on his season ended up being mostly fine. Like, when you just look at the individual numbers, but it was just a very uneven campaign. How much of is there actually there's stuff he could do better? We've talked about his finishing around the basket in the past. I also wonder if they're able to open up more space for him, if that just improves. You've mentioned, I know you've been an advocate of like, well, you don't want to disinvolve him from the offense too much. Like in that playoff series, it felt like he wasn't on the ball enough. Is there any level of concern here? Or do we just talk this up to that man had his jaw wired shut? And just the physical toll that has to extract from you of probably losing weight, not being as strong, that we just need to write off whatever issues we had with him last season.
I don't think we write it off entirely because I think, when you have a kind of consistent injury history, that's something you have to factor, right? Like you have to think about that with Darius. You have to think about that with Donovan. Like Donovan's missed more games than Darius the last 4 or 5 years. Like that we have to think about that. We have to think, about guard depth because these guys are going to miss some time. But in terms of, the stuff that went wrong, like I do chalk that up, to injuries. People focus on the jaw injury, rightly so. He did have the situation with his grandmother passing as well, where, he's incredibly close to his family. So after games, he would fly back home to be there with his family, then fly back to Cleveland or wherever they were playing, and then, play another game, then fly back to his family and kind of do that for an extended period of time. And, when you're already working your way back from an injury, that's going to be difficult. And, in the long list of things that went wrong for him last year, I think people overlook what happened at the start of the year, right? He and Donovan started the year with hamstring injuries. He injured his shooting hand, I believe, in the first game back and was wearing, a brace for about a month, kind of on and off, trying to figure that out. And I think that really impacted his ability to handle the ball. Like you saw the turnovers go way up for him. You saw a reluctance to take 3-pointers because he just couldn't grip the ball. Ironically, like his stats were still fine in that stretch because he was actually finishing really well at the rim and he was drawing free throws. He just became he was seeking out contact to such an extent to kind of compensate for the fact that he couldn't really grip the ball to shoot, that he ended up ramming his jaw into Kristaps Porzingis's hip and things went sideways there. But that Boston injury was terrible timing because at that point the hand injury had recovered and we did get like this extended stretch of, there's the 22-8 Darius on great efficiency, not turning the ball over that we're used to, right? Like I think a lot of the Darius concern that I hear, especially from national podcasts, is like, well, he just hasn't been the same since Donovan was there. Like it just, his game has completely fallen off. And that
we're just gonna write off that first season together then, I guess. Like that.
Yeah, like that couldn't be further from the truth. Like he averaged, I think, 0.1 fewer points per game, but actually more per 36. He just played fewer minutes. His efficiency went way up. He across the board. His defensive metrics went through the roof. His assist to turnover ratio was second to only Nikola Jokic among like high usage players. Like this is a guy that like that was the player that we saw. And I was really expecting to see a step forward from him and a leap going into next year. When we talked to him in media day, he was talking about how he really wanted to up the volume for his 3-point attempts, which of course got sidetracked and derailed by an injury to the shooting hand. So I have some concerns because I think when you're building positive momentum and you have a setback like this and, just kind of one of these throwaway years, I think it is a challenge to get back to not only where you were before, but then, take that step forward that you were anticipating taking. That's, not something that should just be taken for granted and assume that it's going to occur. But if I had to bet, at the very least, I think we're getting Darius going back to who he was in 22, 23. I'm still, I'm emotionally, and this is probably, me being an optimist, but I think we're still going to see that step forward in the leap that we should have seen last season.
What is, because I assume that he texts you on the regular, what's going on with Isaac Okoro?
So I think that's it's a complicated situation because you alluded to it before where, kind of the middle class under this new CBA is just getting squeezed. I think from the Cavs perspective, they don't want to enter the luxury tax until next season because, that the repeater is tough. You saw, I think, Bomber letting Paul George walk for nothing is a bit of like a signal to fans that, hey, things are going to be a little bit different under this. And we have to, kind of take this into consideration. The reporting out there, I think, from what the Cavs are reportedly offering. I don't know. I think to people that aren't familiar, even though we got partnership with the Cavs, we do not do reporting. We do not talk to the team about this stuff. It
I
does
honestly
sound
just
low.
assumed they ran moves by you to make sure you guys were okay
Yeah.
with it.
I mean, I wish if they did, Isaac Okoro
What
would
would
be
you say
locked up for
about this
now.
on your podcast if we gave Isaac Okoro $13 million?
He'd be on a lifetime contract at this point if they consulted the podcast. No, I do think that mid-level range, I think would be fair for Okoro, but it becomes difficult to fill out their roster, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're just listening to some reporting from Chris Fedor and other people on the beat, like they're still exploring options, right? Like they're still looking at potential Caris LeVert moves, right? And if you can find one of those deals that sheds some salary, maybe it makes it more feasible to sign Okoro to extension that works for both sides. You know, I do think, it wouldn't surprise me if they're out there shopping him as well, right? Like even in combined with Caris LeVert to see what's out there. When I hear the name of Cam Johnson, like I'm not for it for Jared Allen, but if you're talking about that kind of package, I can see, balancing the roster out that way and finding a way to add some length and some versatility could be attractive. So I think he's in a little bit of a roster crunch. They used a first round pick on a guy that's going to be playing a very similar position as well. There's depth at the shooting guard position with Sam Merrill. Ty Jerome's probably going to play some minutes there. So it's a bit of a leverage game, and I think a lot of players kind of in his position are facing that when it comes to negotiations with teams.
I will say I can already see myself pulling my hair out if Cam Johnson is playing next to Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, and the Cavs have a below average defensive rebounding rate in those minutes. I will be fuming.
That's why we got Jaylon Tyson, baby. Don't you worry. He's here. He's here to fill those rebounding gaps, getting his triple doubles in summer league or damn close to it. He came one assist short, but everyone was missing those shots on the 10th one. But I'm all aboard the Jaylon Tyson Express here.
So I guess just based off your read on it, they're like 10.7 below the tax right now is what I have them at. So if Isaac Okoro is going to get more than that, it's probably as part of a sign and trade where he's elsewhere. There's like another move that the Cavs are making because
I don't think he's going to get signed and trade this summer. I think I think the Q qualifying offer is possible. I think an extension is certainly possible. I don't know if that 10.7 includes some sort of Isaac Okoro cap hold. I haven't dove into the finances a little bit, but
I don't think it does, but I'll have to double check that. I would say though the qualifying offer might not be a great scenario for them because it nukes his trade value since his bird rights won't transfer.
Right, and I think it's 11 million as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like we're right back into that scenario. So I expect a resolution at some point because something does have to happen. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to see a move to free up some space or a move to go over for a player that they feel is a little more worthwhile. Like I think that is certainly possible, but as much as he took a step forward last year in the regular season, and I don't think they win Game 7 against Orlando without Okoro. I think Game 2 stands out as well as a game where he had a very impactful stretch in that series. The hesitancy to take shots in the playoffs just really has cost him. I think he's a player that would benefit from a more structured offense, a movement offense like Kenny Atkinson plays. Just a better understanding what he should be doing out there on the court because he does have really good instincts. Like I thought he had a really, really great regular season, and I think he's one of the best on-ball defenders in the league. And usually, elite on-ball defenders that shoot 39% from three on over 3 attempts per game, like there's usually a spot for those teams, or those type of players. But unfortunately for him, like spacing and shooting is just at such a premium with the Cavs that I think it becomes more of a conversation. Whereas if he played for like the Indiana Pacers, I think like you can play him in the playoffs, even if he's not taking threes incredibly easily because they play up tempo and you need that point of attack defense. You saw what TJ McConnell just got from them. Like Okoro's a much better defender and shooter than TJ McConnell. Like I think it would be a really seamless fit. But when you're out there with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, like a lot is expected from you to make up for that shooting deficit at those two positions.
And it's also a situation with him where because of who's already on the Cavs, that you can't really expand his role on the ball. And like even the stuff he might be able to move away off the ball, you already mentioned spacing. Like that's just they don't have the space to do that the way Indiana would. And so it makes it a interesting. So I'm very curious to see how this ends. Like, I'm assuming if you had to guess, he's probably just back with the team for next season. Would be your
Yeah. I think he'll be on the roster opening night if I had to guess.
I'm wondering if we can go through some of the other players on this roster and just get your impressions on what they did last season and what you expect their role to be moving forward. Let's begin with was a new addition this year. Now he's a Cavs vet, Max Strus.
Cavs legend. Get it right. Yeah, Max, I think had the best season of his career. Another guy that took a playmaking leap last season. I think Max and a lot of those guys that played in that stretch without Mobley and Garland. I think one of the things that wasn't discussed enough was, we talked about how it was a light schedule. They actually had a lot of time off during that stretch as well because they had that Paris trip that, gave them basically a week off and an all-star break in the middle of the season. But despite that, the increased load that all of those guys played, like that took a number. That did a number on all of them. Like Donovan's knee kind of went to crap and he was shut down after the all-star break. Dean Wade's knee went to crap, got shut down. Max Strus's knee, they had to shut him down after the All-Star break. Caris LeVert had the same issue as well. Like the physical burden of like just carrying the team against a bunch of below 500 teams with Garland and Mobley out, like that cost all of those guys physically. So I think Max, probably won't need to be counted on as much as he was last season. Ended up needing to play a lot of point guard for the Cavs.
The playmaking from him was just incredible.
But like his efficiency in those games was way down because he's playing such a heavy on ball role. He was like forcing shots at the rim, but they just like really needed someone to take an attempt at some point. Like I just think that he's going to be in a role that's much more aligned to like what we thought we were getting when we signed Max Strus. I loved everything that he added to his game. I loved the season that he had. He was like the on-off god for the Cavs. But I think a funny stat to look at is when you look at the games that he played with Darius Garland last year, he shot 45% from the floor and 39% from three. In the games he played without Garland, he shot 37% from the floor and 29% from three. Like that's a 10% difference in 3-point percentage and a massive gap in field goal percentage. And I think some of that is, how much easier Darius makes life for everybody else and just, having a point guard active on the roster. I think some of that is how much he was asked to do in those games. And I think that had a toll on his efficiency. And I think that had a toll on him physically. So I'm excited for another year, Max.
Yeah, I think even just you broke it down with Darius Garland, but he only played 620 minutes with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell on the floor. And in those minutes, he shot 38.9% from three and 57.1% on twos. And so I would guess that if the Cavs are relatively healthy, he's going to have an incredibly efficient season. One that's probably closer to, was that now 3 years ago in Miami, or is 21-22, where he shot 41% from three and like 56% from two. So that would be my guess for him. I thought someone who has had, it's not even just quietly had a good season in Cleveland, but has had quietly like a good couple seasons in Cleveland, Mr. Caris LeVert.
Yeah. And if I had to guess, I think this is Caris's last year with the Cavs. I think they drafted his kind of successor in Jaylon Tyson, someone that is able to provide playmaking, is able to provide shooting, is able to provide defense and rebounding and all that kind of stuff. I'm very high on Jaylon Tyson, but I've been impressed with what Caris has done. I think people get frustrated with him because the efficiency kind of is a roller coaster where he goes through very high highs and very low lows when it comes to his shot making. But the playmaking's been really important, especially when you talk about navigating the injuries that they've had. It's been really, really important that he is such a good pick and roll ball handler that's able to make life easier for the bigs and generate some of those shots and take and make some tough shots at times. And his defense, man, like that's been the biggest thing in his time in Cleveland. Like the defense he played in Brooklyn and Indiana like pales in comparison to what he's done as a Cavalier, and he's really bought in.
Way with Spida too, when you look at what he did in Utah versus what he's done in Cleveland.
Yeah, and Max had some rough defensive metrics in Miami. I think some of that was he had to play a lot of power forward at 6'5". People gripe about him playing small forward, but he was playing a lot of four in Miami. But I do think they've managed to get the best out of all of these guys kind of individually defensively. Darius didn't have a strong defensive reputation, but the metrics have really kind of, shot up across the board for him. When you look at defensive EPM, he's been well above average the last couple of years. Max has improved, Donovan's improved, Caris has improved. So, I think that's one of those things that you have to give credit to the past coaching staff, and it's going to be interesting to see if that translates to this new one under Kenny Atkinson. Not that he hasn't, had a defensive reputation himself. I know in talking to the Light Years boys, Sam and Andy, they talked about how, from what they've heard, he played a major role in the Warriors' defense in the championship year, and his influence had a big difference. So hopefully it continues. But that's one of those things where you got to give credit to the old coaching staff for sure.
Dean Wade looked like he was back for a minute, and I guess in a sense he was back because he got injured again. Right ankle, right knee stuff, really. But what's you were, I think, approaching this upcoming year from him last time we did this with like a measured dose of skepticism. Where are you sort of at with him now? Because it seems like healthy Dean Wade is pretty much exactly what this team needs.
Drives me nuts. That's the problem, man. Like, it's been too many years. It's been too many years that we are sitting and earnestly talking at the end of the season, being like, well, if Dean Wade was healthy, like, it's a true thing. He is a really impactful player, someone that, really helps from a rebounding standpoint. He protects the rim well. He shoots well. He can defend 3 through 5. He's someone that you can throw on a Jason Tatum. He's done a great job on Tatum historically, and other longer wings like that. It's just, he can't stay healthy. And, it's been at the end of the year, whether it was, the play-in or the last 2 years in the playoffs, like, he just hasn't been available or hasn't been himself at that time of year. Healthy Dean Wade really matters. When you look at the current roster construction where they don't currently have a backup center, Dean Wade's really going to matter. He might need to play some backup 5. I expect them to bring in a center before camp, but as it currently stands, he is still a very important part of this equation. I don't know if he's at 100% health yet. I know when media day came around last year, he said his shoulder was at about 85%, but he was very effective to start the year, and he did have a very good stretch before the knee issues came up. So I hope he can stay healthy. I think he's been a very valuable part of this, but somewhere it would be nice to fuse both, like, him and Georges Niang together and just get someone that's available all the time, that is a consistent shooter, that has no fear firing away, that can defend, that can rebound. Like, this is why when we came to last off season, I so badly wanted Naz Reid and I so badly wanted PJ Washington for the Cavs, because I wanted that player that kind of brings both of those traits to the table, someone that is perfect to stagger with either Mobley or Allen, and also lets you get to test drive what it looks like, a potential post Jared Allen world where you kind of have a stretch forward that's able to provide rim protection and play defense at the 5. Like, I think if you ever had Mobley as kind of the primary starting center, you'd need a rim protecting 4 like a Naz Reid, because that allows Mobley to still play free safety and doesn't kind of reduce him to the Rudy Gobert role on the defensive end.
One of my favorite players from this team last season, Mr. Sam Merrill. Papa Shot God, I'm assuming, but
Papa Shot God, apparently a very good golfer. I was listening to a podcast on Locked On Cavs. Shout out Danny Cunningham. Merrill apparently has a 3 handicap, which is a little bit braggy, but he's a great golfer. I don't know how much of a role he's going to have, just because of he plays at one of the deepest positions for the Cavs. The guard depth is wild on this team. I do think that Ty Jerome is going to give him a run for his money when it comes to minutes as well. But I could definitely see him being that kind of spark plug that comes in and gives them some juice offensively in kind of that 10th or 11th man role.
So you expect Ty Jerome to play like a fairly big role then for this, if you're going to round out the rotation? What are just your impressions of him then? Like, he's got nice size. I don't think people understand that Ty Jerome's like pretty big for what he is positionally.
He's 6'5". He's 6'5". He doesn't turn the ball over. He shoots well from 3. He's a good defender. He would have been the perfect guard for staggering Donovan and Darius. Unfortunately, he rolled his ankle in the second game of the season and was done for the year. Like, it's wild, man. Like, we talked at media day, we talked to Max Strus, and we were saying, when you were in Miami, you were playing a lot of minutes without a point guard. You had to play a lot of minutes at power forward because of injuries. Like, it was just, a very, very weird season where you're out of context. How good is it going to be to play for Cleveland, where you're going to have a point guard on the floor at all times? There's great depth. There's Garland. There's Jerome. There's Rubio, right? Like, we just, we felt so good about it. And then by game 2, we're down our first, second, and third string point guards. Like, that's ridiculous. That absolutely ridiculous. And of course, he was playing power forward. I do expect Ty Jerome to have a role. Obviously, he played under Kenny Atkinson in Golden State, so I think they have a relationship there. He's good friends with Donovan Mitchell. I think he's the type of role player that would have been a great fit for them last year, but just one of those kind of unfortunate injuries. And I think, in an offseason where they didn't make any additions outside of Jaylon Tyson and JT Thor on a two-way and Luke Travers on a two-way, I do think Ty Jerome is probably going to be one of those kind of sneaky. I don't even want to call him an addition, but he is an addition that people aren't factoring in.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, just because he has nice size. He was, in 22, 23, he shot the ball pretty well, even on some pull-ups, and so that's just like a very interesting player for what this team could need. A fun player from the season, who I just don't know how they would ever carve out a role for moving forward outside of injury, Craig Porter Jr. Thinking of him, he's like a very idiosyncratic player when you consider the position that he plays.
Yeah, I'm a massive Greg Porter Jr. fan. I really like what he brings to the table. Sneaky old, like he is the same age as Darius, but a good undrafted find for the Cavs who have had a lot of success with undrafted players like Dean Wade, like Lamar Stevens. Brought up, I shouldn't even say brought up through the G League, because he didn't really get the opportunity to play in the G League with the injuries. I definitely am happy that he's on the roster as a break glass in case of emergency guard. Talked about how Darius and Donovan missed time, and Ty Jerome's missed a lot of time in his career. I think there is going to be a time where Craig Porter Jr. is going to be important for this team. Unfortunately, another guy that got hurt right before the playoffs, so we didn't have the luxury of playing him. So he joined that very, very long list for Cleveland, but I definitely think that there's going to be a time where Craig Porter Jr.'s presence on the roster matters.
Where are you at with Georges Niang a year later after adding him?
Like, less enamored than I was kind of coming in. Carter was the bigger Georges Niang guy out of the two of us. I mean, George the person I love. I love him in interviews. I love him on podcasts. I love
my nickname as well, for sure.
Yeah, well, he had a great nickname with the minivan, and then they bestowed the nickname G-Wagon on him as well, which I love. I expect him to have a better season than he did last year. He sneakily had a great post All-Star break stretch for the Cavs. Just everything was going wrong, so it kind of fell under the radar. I expect him to bounce back and be productive, but there's the obvious limitations with him, right? Where he's just not going to be able to defend in space to the level that a Dean Wade would be when you're looking at guys competing for minutes at that position. And there's the possibility that if they do downsize and play some small ball, maybe a Jaylon Tyson's getting minutes there, or Max Strus gets some more minutes at power forward like he did last season. So I do think he's someone that's really going to help them over an 82 game season. But when it comes to the playoff kind of rotation and whatnot, I think there was a lot of issues with him against the Magic. A lot of their minutes that went very poorly involved Georges Niang getting targeted, particularly by Paolo Banchero. I think some of that was a product of Jared Allen being out with the broken rib and whatnot. So I do think it's not someone that I'm counting on when it comes to the postseason just yet.
And just kind of another guy you can't count on to rebound at a consistent clip for you either, which is something this team definitely needs as a secondary frontline presence. Sounds like you're pretty high on Jaylon Tyson. So what are your early impressions of him? That was the thing I heard coming into the draft before he's ever on the Cavs, was people kept analoging him to Caris LeVert a lot of the time, and now that's obviously picked up even more steam because he's on Caris LeVert's team.
He is Jaime Jaquez with a 3-ball. That's my favorite comp. Real modest expectations. I will say he's a year younger than Jaquez coming out of college. He was better in college than Jaquez. He has shot better from three than Jaquez. I just really like the comp because I think they win in similar ways, where they don't blow people away with their ability to blow by people. Hawkes is a very good vertical athlete, but that the first step isn't how he wins. He's kind of got that crafty game where he really uses his strength to get to the rim and finish well and get to his spots. Jaylon Tyson plays in the same kind of way. I love his ability to fill up a box score with rebounds, blocks. He blocked a 3 in summer league, which just surprised the hell out of me. But he's just kind of got that timing and he's got that knack for winning. And what I really like about him is you look at his college career, and prior to his last season, he was a very good role guy, right? Like he shot the spot up threes at an elite rate. The defense was there. All the kind of metrics that you wanted to see from a 3-and-D wing were present. Then the last season, like he was basically the straw that stirs the drink, right? Like he was doing absolutely everything. He had Luka levels of usage on offense, was shooting the ball really well. But the defense slipped a little bit. And, he still shot well from 3, but not as well. I'm really interested to see, okay, in a more defined role where you're playing off of good creators and whatnot, like, is he able to kind of take that step forward? And like, this is the type of guy that if he hits, it really moves the needle for Cleveland, right? Like you've seen it time and time again with these playoff teams where, whether it's a Christian Braun or, Jaime Jaquez, like these guys that come in that spent a little bit more time in college, that are ready to contribute right away. Maybe they're brought along slowly, but once they hit, it just completely kind of changes the complexion of these teams. And, drafting a wing that does project to be a 3-and-D wing that can create, that can do a variety of things, that, is the exact same height as a Jaylen Brown. Like that is what the Cavs need. And it's really hard to find those type of players, and they don't become available once they hit the trade market. So I'm very, very high on Tyson and what he can bring to the team. I just don't think that role is going to be there at the start of the season.
Yeah, I'm curious, and you already mentioned this, just how he ends up faring away from the ball if he's going to get minutes from this team. But is there a chance? I do think we sometimes tend to over romanticize what rookies can do for really good teams. But you mentioned the Nuggets. Christian Braun contributed to them winning a title when he was a rookie. When you look at sort of the way the front line is set up right now, where Dean Wade always seems like he's dealing with something, there's the uncertainty, like not to put him in the front line, but like just the uncertainty with Isaac Okoro right now in his contract situation, maybe just his role moving forward. And then on top of that, maybe not being in love with the Georges Niang minutes. Is there a pathway, even if it's like kind of post-trade deadline or something, and they've just exhausted all their other options and haven't found the solution, that he plays a role for this team as like a meaningful role for this, not necessarily on the floor in crunch time, but as part of like a core part of their maybe tertiary or secondary lineups?
I think it's certainly possible. I think he is someone that maybe gives them some flexibility to pursue a deal like that. Like, talk about how they're, shallow at the 4 or 5, where, you got some backup options at the 4, but none of them are really like kind of a true 4 or 5 where they can actually slide over and play the center. Like if an opportunity comes along to get like an Isaiah Stewart or a Larry Nance Jr. And move on from Caris LeVert, like, that might be something that they consider if they really like what they're seeing in practice from Jaylon Tyson, right? Like, if you can kind of stitch together the Caris LeVert role with Tyson, Jerome, Sam Merrill, and maybe, a little bit more responsibility for Isaac Okoro. If you feel confident about your ability to do that, then you can make kind of one of those smaller consolidation trades to go address your need to get a big wing or to get that 4 or 5, right? I definitely think that, if he hits, if he is someone that, appears ready, and when injuries inevitably hit, because they hit every team, hopefully not as hard as last year, but when those injuries hit, like, he's going to have an opportunity to prove himself in the way that, Craig Porter Jr. did last year. If he steps up like Craig Porter Jr. did as a guy that had been in college for, an extended period of time, I think that could inform the decision making come trade deadline. Like, you don't want to like count on an 18-year-old rookie, but this is a guy that's turning 22 in December. This is a guy that has physical maturity. That this is, someone that, if he's going to be an NBA player and going to be a rotation player, you're probably going to need to see it sooner rather than later, because he's a little further along on the development curve.
Are you ready to enter the lightning round cookie cutter portion of the podcast?
Hell yeah. Always ready.
What is this team's biggest need right now?
A 4 or 5. without a doubt a 4 or 5. I would love a stretch power forward that is able to protect the rim. I said Isaiah Stewart. I would love him. Larry Nance Jr. I would love him. Get me one of those guys and give me some depth at the big.
I would say Larry Nance Jr. feels eminently gettable if the Hawks are serious about playing Jalen Johnson again, plus Onyeka Okongwu. So that feels like
Bring
they
him
could also,
home.
and if they like Caris, like right now their backup point guards either Dyson Daniels and or Kobe Buffkin, and so to have Caris LeVert's playmaking, not the worst idea in the world for them there. So that would be interesting.
It would save the Cavs a lot of money as well.
The Hawks would have to send out more money because they don't want to pay the tax either. So.
That's that would probably be the hang up at this point. There's Cavs would want to shed salary, and the Hawks do not want to pay the luxury tax for whatever that team is going to be.
Are you open to the idea of like acquiring someone who's more of just a 4 or a combo wing rather than it having to be a combo big?
Yeah, for sure. Like I did mention Cam Johnson before. Like if there is an avenue there to Cam Johnson deal, I would be very open to that. And just signing like a JaVale McGee to be the backup big, like I bring him home. I'm here for it. Or bringing back Tristan Thompson as a break glass in case of emergency big. Like maybe you can do that. Take advantage of whatever the best opportunity is out there. But ideally, I would love that kind of stretch 4.
So let's just assume, because we like to be optimistic here, this roster is fully healthy. What does the top 10 rotation look like? I think it feels like safe. I mean, Isaac Okoro of it all makes this so complicated, but it feels like there might be like 8 or 9 locks to it.
Yeah, let's just say assuming Okoro's back, because I think that makes it easier. I think starting 5 with Strus is locked in. I think after that it's Caris LeVert, Isaac Okoro. I'd assume Georges Niang over Dean Wade. And then 9-10 would be Dean Wade, and Ty Jerome would be my guess.
That's how I had Sam Merrill penciled in for the 10th spot, but I'm just like a Sam Merrill fanatic I recognize
it's very possible that I'm wrong on that. It's very possible I'm wrong.
I mean, Kenny Atkinson teams do like to shoot threes, so
Sam
Merrill might come in and just get on heaters. What is this team's? This will be, I'm sure it'll be matchup dependent, but you do get into interesting, like the two bigs of it all question. If we fast forward to the end of the season, what do you think ends up being their most used crunch time lineup?
I think it's the starting 5 still. They have not played a lot of minutes together in the clutch. Like that's one thing, that has been talked about, but their minutes have actually been good when they're in the clutch together. I just think this might be cheating a little bit too. I think it's more interesting how they close, when they're down. Like if, it's a 5-point game and they're trailing the Boston Celtics or something like that. Where do they go in those situations? Because I think for the majority of the season, they're probably going to be leading in the fourth quarter. I think that this is a team that's going to be in the mid-50s in terms of wins. And that just means like you're going to be closing out a lot of teams. And I think when you're closing out teams and you have the lead, you're going to want Mobley and Allen out there. You're going to want Garland. You're going to want Mitchell. You're going to want Strus.
Is there a weird, offbeat, unpredictable lineup that you would like to see them roll out this season?
This is going back to Jaylon Tyson. I'd like to see a little Jaylon Tyson at the 4. I don't care which pairing it's with. I don't care if it's, I still think if you're trying to maximize this roster, I do think when you're staggering, you're still going to want Garland and Mobley together. I think they have the best chemistry together. We saw them in a game, a playoff game against Boston without Donovan, without Jared. They still almost beat Boston in game 4. It came down to the wire. Boston had 30 more free throws and still barely won. Like that pairing still rocks. They're really good together, even in a limited state. I still want to see them together. I still want to see Donovan and Jarrett together because I think Jarrett's the better screen setter, and he fits Donovan's skill set better than Mobley does. I just want Tyson out there. I want him out there. I want to see him. Whether it's with like a Sam Merrill and a Max Strus, just to get ultimate shooting and let him kind of make decisions with space and a big man to play off of. I just want to see what the rookie can do, which again ties into like, if it hits, that makes a huge difference, right? Like that addresses one of the biggest needs that this team has, from a contending macro standpoint. So any opportunity to kind of let him shine, I think would be the funky lineup I want to see.
And you might have sold me on him to the point where the lineup I was trying to figure out is I want Mobley at the 5, but I want no bones about like, we will run the offense a good share of the time through him. So I was looking for a fifth. I'm just
Garland, Merrill, Strus, Tyson, Mobley. Let's go.
I want none of Mitchell or Garland on during those minutes. I'm not leaving anything up to debate.
Okay.
So give me Merrill.
Ty Jerome, Merrill, Strus, Tyson, Mobley.
Done. Book it.
Let's go.
I'd like to see that.
I'm into it.
As we record this, which is being recorded on September the 4th, their over-under is set at 48.5. Are you taking the over or the under?
Hammer the over. They were at that line with everything going wrong last season. I think they are a very easy over.
We haven't done our over-unders yet, like Brant and I. I was surprised that it ended up kind of here, but I guess that might say more about just the state of the East at the top, where if they're taking in like jumps from Indiana or Orlando on top of Philly, New York, Boston, of course, is there. But I was surprised. Like I thought this one was going to be at least 49. Obviously not a huge gap, but I thought it was going to be like 50-ish around there. Where do you see them so there's Boston, obviously, but how do you see them stacking up with the other teams that are mentioned in that conversation of who's the second best team in the East? Is there between Milwaukee, Philly, and New York specifically? And if you want to throw Orlando, Indiana, Miami in there, is like, which of those teams either fascinate you the most? Do you find the most difficult matchup for the Cavs? However you want to go with it.
Yeah, I think the second tier in the East is like New York, Cleveland, Philly, and Milwaukee in some order. I go back and forth between Knicks and Cavs. The interesting thing about the Knicks is they're very similar to the Cavs, which is, the conversation of how do you win without a consensus top 10 player. I think it's the same kind of team building questions. I think it'll be really interesting to see how. I think Julius Randle's really going to matter to them. Because
I'm sorry, he matters more to them now because they decided to cash in basically all of their trade chips on someone who really shouldn't even be the number 2 best shot creator on a team.
And Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby are two of the worst isolation players in the league that don't provide much playmaking. Mitchell Robinson's not providing playmaking. So Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson are going to be shouldering that load. Obviously, you can sub Dante DiVincenzo in, but we saw that like he's not as effective as a low minute player as he is when he was like playing 42 minutes per game. Like he kind of found his rhythm there. I'm interested to see how that dynamic goes. I have the Knicks still over Philly and Milwaukee. I'm going to need to see it with Milwaukee. I mentioned before that, they were below 500 team with Doc. I think they're better than that, but like, I just need to see them stay healthy. I need to see it click. I need to see how old Brook Lopez is, what Middleton's ankles look like. Like, I don't love it.
I think I'm fine with the way Brook Lopez played last year. I'm not too worried about him, but it's the health thing with them. But I also do think that Milwaukee and Cleveland both, I don't know if it's just because of the gravitas of look at all these moves that Philly and New York made. They're just mentioned like, oh, they're going to be competing for second best in the East. I think both Cleveland and Milwaukee deserve more consideration there. And I would honestly, if you told me Milwaukee was healthy, I would probably pick Milwaukee as the second best team in the East.
I can see it, man. Like so often, NBA history comes down to who's the best player in a series, and Giannis is still probably the best player in the East. Philly, the top 3 is great, but there are questions, about Embiid and Paul George of can they get healthy or stay healthy by the playoffs? Can they play well in the playoffs? The rest of that roster, man, like that supporting cast is rough. We'll see if it kind of shakes out, but like that's a lot of pressure on that top 3.
They have I think they have a nice top 7 to 8, but you do get into just like you're asking Caleb Martin and Paul George right now to play a lot of 4, and then it's like, is Yabusele going to actually get minutes for this team as of now? They're going to make a move. They have the picks. They have some tradable contracts. So
I just like if Caleb Martin's your 5th best player, how good are you? Like that's the thing I keep running into. Like he would, if you like just dropped him on the Cavs, he's what, 8?
No.
He's behind Strus. He's behind LeVert.
I might still take him over Caris LeVert.
I wouldn't. I don't think he didn't have that great of a season last year, so maybe I'm over-indexing on that. But
he was banged up, and I value he's to me he's more malleable at both ends of the floor when you look at positionally, defensively, and then it's sort of more of a connector rather than a driver of things on offense. But last year was not good for him. I don't remember what he shot from 3, but it wasn't super efficient. But I think he would be.
Yeah, let me look at. Okay, it was 35%, so it was better than I thought. Yeah, I can see the argument. Anyways, yeah, 6 or 7. So yeah, it's not that far different.
I mean, it's the
I'll try
Embiid
to.
health thing for me. For all the people that are harping on Milwaukee's health, and it's like we've watched Joel Embiid now never get to the postseason, like even a semblance of healthy.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, the East, like the top 4 or 5 in the East, is going to be super fascinating to watch unfold last
yeah.
year. And I do think I said this last year to you. If you told me the Cavs were in the NBA Finals last year, I wouldn't bat an eye. I'm not going to predict it, but I wouldn't bat an eye at it.
I'm at that point this year. I think they needed the experience of the last 2 seasons. Um, they've kind of met our preseason predictions on the podcast. Like, 2 years ago when people were saying, even after the Mitchell trade, like you listen to the low post and it's, well, they're behind Toronto, they're behind Atlanta. Atlanta made a conference finals. Like they had them as like the 7-8 seed. I think that sometimes gets forgotten about. And then, they were.
I don't even remember that. So
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
point
trust
proven.
me. I'm petty. I remember everything. You know, like they worked their way up to be kind of that home court team, and everything went wrong last year, and they still got home court. Like I think the experience, everything they went through, the fact that even in a depleted state where Mitchell's knees busted, Mobley's playing through a high ankle sprain, Garland's back's messed up, and he's still coming back from the jaw, and Jared Allen's out with a bruised rib. Like they still gave Boston the toughest series. Like that was still the closest Boston got to going 6 games with a team. That to me means something. I do think that the supporting cast is going to be better. I think Darius Garland's going to be a whole lot better. I think Evan Mobley is going to take a step forward. And hopefully Donovan Mitchell's healthy come playoffs because, I was super impressed with his ability to do what he did in the playoffs while being injured. But he was physically limited, man. Like that was a shell of him physically. So I do think I might only put it at like a 5% chance that they can make the NBA Finals, but I do think that they are a team that could beat anyone in the East. It's just going to come down to can they win 3 times? That's going to be the hard thing.
Justin, is there anything about this team, anyone else on this team we didn't discuss that you would like to touch upon before I let you skedaddle?
I mean, we went deep on Jaylon Tyson. I mean, just I would encourage people to watch summer league highlights because those obviously really matter. Summer league really, really matters. We've never seen someone play well there and not play well in the NBA. No,
Alex Starr, clearly the biggest draft bust of all time. Like
of
these
course,
summer league
yeah,
things matter. Yeah.
they take it incredibly seriously. No, I did like so we don't watch college. Like Carter and I don't watch college. So we had Maxwell Baumgartner on right before the draft, and it was funny that he said like before then he's like my favorite fit for the Cavs is Jaylon Tyson, and then boom, Jaylon Tyson. Like it was great that it worked out that way. My big thing, and I think one of the takeaways from Boston's championship is I do think the NBA is moving, especially in this kind of parity-driven league, to you need to have guys that can do a lot of things. You need guys that can create a lot of positions. I think Kenny Atkinson's offense is catered towards that, and I hope that the Cavs are taking a step towards that direction because I think in the past it was too clearly defined who was a play initiator and who was a play finisher, and that made them predictable in the playoffs. I think they have the personnel. I think they have the coaching staff in place, and I think the failures of the last 2 years in the playoffs have kind of highlighted that need enough that they're able to take those proper steps forward. Because if they are able to do that, where it's not always on Darius and it's not always on Donovan to create absolutely everything, I do think that this roster has the talent to go out there and have their offense translate to the playoffs.
Justin, this was fantastic, educational, instructive, insightful, the whole nine. As always, can you just very quickly tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic audio content that you're just pumping out there?
Wherever you found this podcast, you can find the Chase Down. We are on the Cavs YouTube channel. We do go live once a week in the off season, twice a week in during season. Support us, leave us ratings, reviews, all that good stuff, just like you do with Hardwood Knocks. If you're not doing that and you listen to these podcasts, what are you doing, man? Like it's the easiest thing in the world. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm not on there super frequently, but at Cavs you can find me there.
The Twitter handle that I was mispronouncing until last year, so for basically 7 years or whatever it was Cavdanata is what I would call it.
It looks way better in writing than it does out loud. That's not your fault.
Well, thanks so much. As you know by now, I will be pestering you again down the line, so I'll talk to you soon, man.
You better. I will take it very personally if you don't.